Glory cookies. They are an original recipe from the 1940s, and I'm going to pass around the recipe, and you're going to get a big kick out of it, ladies, because it calls for spry. Any of you remember spry? So they were an especially moist cookie that would ship very well to the soldiers. So I'm sending around the recipe, and I think you'll enjoy it. I have 2 more plates to distribute here. They're what we would call today a bar cookie. Well, we'll start here. Yes, we'll start here. All right. How many of you had a parent in World War II? That's fewer than I thought, but how many of those ever talked about the war? Oh, that's more than I expected too. Well, my father never talked about it, and a lot of veterans, I'm sure you've heard of that war, did not talk about it. In 2003, my mother gave me her and my father's letters from the war. There were almost 300 of them, and they dated from October of 1940 until the war's end in 1945. In my parents' case, he had sent her letters back to her for safekeeping, so I have both my father's and my mother's letters, which makes it a pretty rich collection. And as I said, I got them in 2003. My father, however, had died when I was 18, so I really never got to know him like you would get to know a parent as an adult. So my book it's a war story, a love story, and it's a memoir of my getting to know my father. It's part creative nonfiction, it's part history, and it's part memoir. So I'm going to start with my dad's name, which was Herb, and that's how I refer to him in the book. So if you hear me referring to Herb, that's who I'm talking about, okay? He enlisted in the Signal Corps of the Army for the Hawaiian Department in 1940. Who knows what they do in the Signal Corps? Does anyone here know? Tug?
Well, it's the home of communications. The Signal Corps home is right here at Fort Gordon, outside of Augusta. But they have today, in addition to all the communications, they have also the computer training center for the Army.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, of course, they didn't have computers in 1940, but basically they were doing telephoning, teletyping, telegraphing, and they also did photography. So it was, like Tug said, mainly communications. So my father left his home in Norristown, Pennsylvania in July of 1940, and he headed for Fort Jackson, which is here in Columbia, South Carolina. And this is an old postcard from that era, and also a picture of the barracks at the time. Now, Fort Jackson started out as Camp Jackson in 1918, and it was abandoned in 22, and then it was reactivated in 1930, and renamed Fort Jackson in 1940. It is still a working base. And from there, he went to ship out to Hawaii. He made a stop at Fort McDowell, which is in Angel Island, an island off of San Francisco. And this picture kind of gave me fits in my research, because I took it to Oahu with me when I did research there. And the curator of the U.S. Army Museum on Oahu said, that building's not on Oahu. I couldn't figure out where this building was until she told me, well, he's there in his olive drabs, which is a winter uniform. And they never wore that winter uniform here in Hawaii. So then I figured this was probably en route to Hawaii. And I looked for pictures of Angel Island and Fort McDowell, and there it was. This is the guardhouse today, and this is the guardhouse when my father was there in August of 1940. And this picture is now in a display at the new visitors center in Fort McDowell. They asked my permission if they could use it. I said sure. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little aside in my research. So he headed for Oahu, and this is, I'm sorry, this is not a 1940s map of Oahu, but for the first 20 days of being there, he was quarantined at Fort Armstrong, which is was a coastal, this thing is not working all of a sudden, coastal artillery base in Honolulu Harbor, which is here. Now, you have to understand, 1940s Oahu had one of the largest military buildups of U.S. troops anywhere in the world. There were military posts all over Hawaii, in addition to 8 radar stations. So my father was bound for Hickam Air Force Base right here. Of course, there's Pearl Harbor. You have a Naval Reserve Station here, and Ford Island is also an island right there, naval base, which is still there. Ava was a Marine Corps base, and you also had Fort DeRussy down here. You have Kanewehe, which is a Navy air naval base there. And you also had Schofield Barracks, which was the largest Army post anywhere in the United States in 1940. Who knows what famous book was set at Schofield Barracks?
Tornado Germany?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Trivia guy. Okay, so you had military all over this island. And I found in my research a very compelling contrast between the military buildup and the fact that Hawaii at the time was just growing its travel industry, and they were just starting to have air flights into Hawaii. So you have, oops, excuse me, I made a mistake. We'll get back to that subject in a minute. This is a map of Hickam. This is the base operations building where my father was when they were bombed. This is the parade ground. This is what's known as the Consolidated Barracks. It could house 3,200 men. And these are hangars. And this is a big airstrip, a characteristic A of Hickam Field. This shot was drawn November 26, 1941. These are temporary housing right here. Hickam Field was right next to Pearl Harbor. It could accommodate the B-17 bomber, or the Flying Fortress, when no other military base could accommodate the landings of the B-17. Herb's Air Force was known as the Hawaiian Air Force, and sometimes jokingly referred to as the Pineapple Air Force, because the men would say, well, all we're doing is guarding pineapples here. Of course, that's before the war. Okay. So we talk a lot about the horrific loss of life along with Pearl Harbor. We don't really think sometimes about the horrible loss of American treasure. This building alone, this Consolidated Barracks, was the largest barracks of its kind on any military post in the United States. It cost to build it was built from 1939 to 1940. It cost $1 million to build. It's just one building. So by 1938, the Navy had spent about $75 million on Pearl Harbor, and the Army more than twice that on military installations to protect it. From 1939 until the outbreak of war, much building was going on at Pearl Harbor. There were additional dry docks, power plants, shops, storehouses, piers, wharves, barracks, office buildings, cranes, mechanical equipment, various utilities. So it was all brand spanking new. These are some pictures of Hickam Field. It was an Art Deco showplace. This is the main gate. This is the water tower, which is of Moorish design, a very distinguishing architectural feature. This is my father out in front of one of the tents at that temporary housing that I was showing you. And now we're getting to that subject that I was so anxious to get to. Was many movie stars and the very rich came to Waikiki Beach at the time. So we have a picture of Dorothy L'Amour on the left, Sonia Haney, and Dorothy Powell. I believe my father took this picture of Dorothy Powell because it's not a very flattering picture. And Dorothy L'Amour, very interesting, she had carried on an affair with a married officer at Hickam. She was there quite a lot. This is one of the upper left-hand corner is Waikiki Beach. You see the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in the back. Look how big the surfboard was. And these are sailors dancing at the Moana Hotel. You can just hear Glenn Miller in the background, can't you? So that was Oahu in the 1940s, a fascinating place. After 7 months at Hickam, my dad wrote, "Nothing ever happens here, just the same routine every day. Sometimes it's very boring." But by spring of 1941, air raid drills were being held. And this is a typical blackout flyer that was passed around, warning people to black out their lights and to comply with this, because if you did not, you could be put in jail. So they were very serious about this. By November 1941, relations with the Japanese had deteriorated. In the week before December 7th, 41, the Hawaiian Department conducted a full-scale exercise, which ended on December 6th. Senior commanders called the exercise a success, and Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox declared, "The Navy is ready to meet any threat."
Navy. The Navy.
So here's what happened on December 7th, folks. On December 7th, Ernest Gillespie, a private in Herb's company, got up, shaved, dressed, and went to Mass in Hickham's gym, then to the chow hall for breakfast. He walked back to the barracks and sat down on its front steps, looking across the airfield. He soon spied planes almost grazing the barracks roof. Planes marked with the red rising sun of Japan, dubbed the meatball by the GIs. As the plane zoomed overhead, Gillespie yelled inside to those in the barracks, "We're being attacked!" He ran 2 blocks to the motor pool as an ear-splitting boom sounded from Pearl Harbor, the first target. Black smoke billowed over the naval base. Hickham's air raid siren blared. While Gillespie sprinted to the motor pool to move the company's trucks under some palm trees, Herb worked teletype in Hickham's Bomber Command signal office in the base operations building, the centrally located nerve center of the base. He relayed new developments from one headquarters to another and sent and took orders for the commanding generals. Only his helmet and the building protected him. Outside, dive bombers whined, machine gun fire chattered, and bombs thundered. Meanwhile, a lineman truck driver in Herb's company, Private Thomas J. Pillion, and another signalman drove a truck full of field wire, telephones, and other equipment to base ops. Japanese bombs hit the hangar line and hangars, whistling past Pillion and his colleague Bill Kokosko as they arrived at base ops and huddled under a palm tree. The air reeked of gunpowder. Lieutenant Colonel Guyan Church, the ranking signal officer, drove up in his staff car and got out with his arms full of sporting guns. He handed Pillion and Kokosko each a shotgun, but no ammunition. They left the guns at the message center. As the 2 signalmen exited base ops, Japanese planes splintered the Hawaiian Air Depot, hangars, and planes on the hangar line. Pillion and Kokosko ducked under a building where a grating had been removed. Minutes later, they headed to their company's supply building. Meanwhile, Air Force gunners manned the parade ground without cover and got mowed down like blades of grass to be replaced by more gunners. The bombing stopped for about 30 minutes. Ambulances began picking up the wounded. Then the bombers returned, blasting Hickam for another 15 minutes. This time, some Japanese planes exploded from anti-aircraft fire. When an enemy plane blew up, everyone stood up and cheered as if at a baseball game. The enemy hammered supply buildings, the base chapel, the enlisted men's beer hall, and the guardhouse. The sparkling new consolidated barracks shook repeatedly with the force of the explosions, which splattered food trays and the bodies of men in the chow hall. Almost all of the 120 Japanese bombs dropped on Hickam hit a target. Reportedly the most heavily bombed building on Oahu, the consolidated barracks burned for 4 hours. Bodies lay everywhere. Though at first some men in Hickam wandered about, panic-stricken, most took heart and fought back, firing 50 caliber machine guns, Thompson submachine guns, Colt 45 automatic pistols, and even World War I era bolt-action Springfield rifles. They may as well have thrown those guns at their attackers. 35 Army Air Force planes took flight, some engaging the enemy and others in pursuit, unaware that most of the Japanese planes had already left the area. Hawaiian Air Force fighter pilot and heir to the great Jew's fortune, George S. Welch, shot down 4 of the 29 enemy planes destroyed that day, the first American to down a Japanese plane. is a very iconic picture, which I'm sure you all have seen. This is Hickam, and this flag flew over the UN Charter meeting, it flew over the Potsdam Conference, and it flew over the White House on the day that Japan surrendered. It's still at Hickam, and I viewed it when I was there. This truck was from one of my father's signal company's buddies' truck. They were repairing a cable there. And this is the Consolidated Barracks burning. And actually, this is my father's photographs. I actually have an original of this, which is pretty nice. This is another picture you may all have seen before. This is also the Consolidated Barracks burning, and these are hangars. This is a picture of the base operations building where my dad was. You can see the Art Deco style. The building still stands at Hickam. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. This is a gentleman in his pajamas looking at the bombing. And this is some of the officers' quarters at Hickam. There's the smoke rising in the background. These are some aircraft that were at Hickam, destroyed, hangars destroyed. This was inside the Consolidated Barracks. And this is as a result of the invasion. There was barbed wire put up all along the beach at Waikiki. So this is outside of the, I believe, the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. The attack was known as the Blitz in Hawaii. And after, by the way, 121 died at Hickam. More than 300 were wounded or missing. After the Blitz, the Hawaiian Air Force became the 7th Air Force, and her signal company was attached to the headquarters and headquarters squadron of the 7th Bomber Command. Don't hear much about the 7th Air Force. It's an unsung Air Force. But it flew more different types of aircraft, a wider range of missions, and longer missions than any other Air Force in World War II. So Herb stayed at Hickam for almost 2 years after the Blitz. And he left for furlough on September 1943, and went home and married my mom. So this is a picture of their wedding. And I have another question for you guys at this point. Who knows what was the most important morale booster in World War II? Close. It was the mail letters. So once they got, my father got back to Oahu, they started back with the writing again. And of course they were encouraged to use V-mail. This is a poster talking about V-mail, and this is an example of one of my father's V-mails. V-mail was a one-page sheet, a combination sheet and envelope. And you could only write on one side of the page. So the GIs complained about that a lot. They had to write really short letters. But the V-mail saved an enormous amount of tonnage on mail ships and planes during the war, space needed for war supplies. A single mail sack replaced 37 mail bags required to carry 150,000 one-page letters. It reduced the weight of that amount of mail from 2,575 pounds to 45 pounds. So it was quite a savings. All right.
What did V stand for? What did V stand for?
I'm sorry, victory.
Okay.
And I wanted to call attention to this quote too, which I found interesting. This was in one of the publications that the 7th Air Force put out. Mail call is one formation that everyone meets promptly. If you get a letter, everything is Jim Dandy. If you don't, it's tough, brother, tough. So 2 months, while my father was gone to get married, some of his colleagues were already moving down under. And down under was not just Australia, which is down here, but here we are in Hawaii. Down under was any of these islands that were under Hawaii. So some of them had already been sent out to Baker Island, to Canton Island, to the Ellis Islands here. There is 2,500 miles between Hawaii and the Gilbert Islands here. So about 2 months after Herb returned from furlough, the 7th Air Force moved its advanced headquarters to Funafuti, which is in the Ellis Islands here, right here. And they were preparing for the invasion of the Gilberts. On November 21st, 1943, the Marines, Air Force, and Navy fought the Battle for Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands for 76 bloody hours. As soon as Tarawa was secured, the 7th Air Force moved its advanced headquarters to the Gilberts, from Funafuti to Gilberts up here, and began preparing for the invasion of the Marshalls. This is what was known as the island hopping campaign. It had begun. In November 43, the 7th Air Force and naval aircraft began hammering the Marshall Islands prior to invading that set of islands at the end of January. So 3 days before that invasion, the 7th Air Force blasted the islands from dawn till dusk, dropping 3.5 million tons of bombs. So here they are going from Gilbert to the Marshalls, which are up here. The Battle of Kwajalein raged from January 31st to February 4th, 1944. It was the first island taken from what Japan considered its homeland, and it was a significant victory. This is a picture of battle-wrecked Kwajalein. So these are the kind of conditions into which my father went when, of course, his being part of a ground crew, he would go in after the invasion, shortly after the invasion. And he arrived on Ella Island in the Gilbert Islands early in February, and the conditions were very primitive. There was a steady diet of sea rations, which were pre-cooked, ready-to-eat canned meals. And to cope with the conditions, the men used sarcasm and gallows humor. They named their tents and offices things like Flabby Arms, Duffy's Tavern, Passion Pit, Hose Company No. 1, Bug Box, Hell's Hip Pocket, Wahine Heaven, and the like. And there were other names that kind of alluded to the stresses of combat, such as Neurosis Towers, Sleepless Hollow, Hallucination House, and Chamber of Horrors. So later on, in February of that year, 44, Herb's command began bombing farther west into the Caroline Islands, which are right here, Caroline. See, so we went from here to here to here, so you see we're getting closer and closer to the Japanese homeland. At the end of March, Herb's squadron headed by landing ship transport to the Marshall Islands. At the end of May, my mother got a letter which had a little snippet of paper in it. My father was trying to bypass the censors, which obviously he did, because the snippet of paper was still in there saying, "I am on Kwajalein." Very fun for me to find that. So I'm going to read a little bit about the conditions on Kwajalein. Battle-wrecked, Kwajalein during the war was no Eden. Choking dust, stirred up by vehicles on the roads, filled the air, smelling like cinders from gunpowder. Difficult to wash away with scarce water, it coated soldiers' skins. Shredded trees, rubble from concrete buildings, dud ammunition, shrapnel-riddled tanks, blighted taro patches, remnants of a railroad line, and piles of war debris covered the atoll. Everything metal had started to rust. In the dugouts, soldiers found tin boxes with portraits of the enemy's loved ones and their souvenirs to send home: toothbrushes, breath freshener, slippers, and socks. Back to Kwajalein. Too soon to go to that one, sorry. I've started talking a little bit about some of the, I made an allusion to it in any way regarding how they named their tents and so forth, about what was known then as battle fatigue or shell shock. So I would like to read to you something my dad wrote in one of his letters. Cole Meyer, who sleeps in the same tent as me and 4 others, wakes us up at night with his nightmares. Last night, one of the fellows entered the tent at 12 after work. He used a flashlight and made as little noise as possible. Nonetheless, Kohlmeyer was aroused and must have been dreaming that he was a captive of the Japs. Raising himself up in bed, he yelled, "What's this? Jesus, spare me!" waking us all up with his outburst. But this case is just a mild one. This morning we mentioned it to him, and he didn't remember anything about it. He has us all wondering. It's amazing what sort of people you meet in the Army. There's never a dull moment, even in your sleep. So while Herb was in the Marshall Islands, we obtained the B-29 bomber, the Super Fortress, and through that summer, his command continued raids of the Carolines, and fighters flew from Saipan to Tinian, which is in Mariana Islands, and other targets there. And Herb arrived in Saipan 2 weeks after that invasion. And so soon his command began softening up Iwo Jima from Saipan. And as I said, by this time they had the B-29s. And this is a picture of them lined up on Saipan. On Saipan, the censorship had eased, and so Herb got to he got to write about some bombing raids, so I got to write about them myself. The air raid alarm sounded, rousing Herb and his buddies from bed at 1 a.m. under a full moon. They scurried for their clothes and headed for their foxholes, cursing. Planes roared overhead and ack-ack lit up the sky. Boom! Cracked the air not far from them, loud and clear, an enemy plane being shot down. The next morning, the soldiers learned that the enemy, dubbed Bed Check Charlie, had dropped no bombs, apparently confused and under fire from our anti-aircraft. 2 additional enemy planes had been down. Our old camp area, wrote Herb, was strafed. It's right next to the airfield, the perfect target for the Japs. Luckily, we moved out when we did, or we would have some casualties today. It was the longest and most exciting raid I ever went through. Kind of interesting to hear him refer to it as exciting, but I guess that's a part of it. So by November of '44, after 9 months in combat, Herb got a furlough and he went home, and he was reassigned stateside. So here he is with my mother at home. He hadn't seen snow for 5 years. So that's the end of my talk, folks. Do you have any questions?
You mentioned shell shock and battle fatigue, which was one of the major causes of casualties and loss of personnel strength and units throughout World War II. I attended a seminar at Command General Staff College back in the 70s on this. There was no equivalent in the Korean War or Vietnam War. And the conclusion that they came to was people that were in World War II were in for the duration. They had no idea how long they were going to be out there away from home. Secondly, Colonel David Hackworth, one of the most decorated soldiers of all time, was in World War II, the Korean War, and also in the Vietnam War. Had multiple combat tours in both Korean War and Vietnam. David Hackworth described this battle fatigue thing as every individual has a bottle full of courage. Every time he's in combat situation, some of that bottle is used up. And when he gets to the bottom, there's nothing left. Combat fatigue, shell shock sets in. These people are actually almost psychotic. But in Korean War, they came out with a point system, whereas you got so many points close to the proximity you had to what they call the forward edge of the battle area. And essentially, after about 12 or 13 months in the Korean War, you would rotate back to the States. And the Vietnam tour was typically 12 months also. So when you went over, you knew when you were coming back. These guys didn't. They didn't know if they were ever coming back. Many of them were gone for 4 years. So that was a major, major factor.
Major problem. There was a very famous movie made about that too, wasn't it? Best Days of Our Lives or something? I think that was it. At any rate, 20% of all casualties in World War II were they called it psychoneurotic at the time, or battle fatigue, or shell shock. There were a couple names for it, but they really didn't have a very good understanding of it at all. And they treated it with basically occupational therapy, arts and crafts, sports, some 101 counseling and some like group therapy sessions, but they really did not have an effective treatment for it at all. Yes?
My husband has had an uncle who came back from the Second World War. He couldn't speak. He had to write things down, and it was the most heartbreaking thing. Because you could see tears, you know, in what, but he never spoke.
I'm wondering if there was a physical explanation for it, because in my research I found that a lot of times there were physical manifestations, but there was really no physical reason why they couldn't be doing certain things. That John Huston put out a very famous documentary on this subject called Let There Be Light. You can get it on Amazon for 99 cents. It's a fascinating film. It shows some of these fellows in treatment with therapists and some of the things that they were suffering from. Very, very excellent film. Of course, you know John Huston went on to be a very famous director. A lot of these directors got their start making training films in World War II. John Ford was another one that got his start that way. So, does anybody else have anything?
What's the other war? There's two wars.
Oh yes, thank you, Charlie.
Well, you can write it down for me to say.
The name of my book is No Ordinary Soldier, My Father's Two Wars. My father was not in two wars. He had an internal struggle that came to light when I did my research. So in addition to my getting to know my father through this research, I found out a secret about him that I will not tell you because this is the surprise ending of the book. But I thought it was going to be PTSD. It wasn't. So it's a very, very interesting saga that I've been through. Yes?
Where did your father retire to in the States? Where did he live?
Well, he came back to Pennsylvania, where I'm from, yeah, and he didn't stay in the Army. He thought maybe a few years later, maybe he told my mom, maybe I should have stayed in, and she thought, maybe not. So he did not stay in, but he, like Tug mentioned, he was in for the duration, and he'd signed up for a 3-year stint, so he writes in his letters about how disgusted he was that now that they're in war, he's stuck. And I can see how that would lead to a stressful mindset because you don't know, you don't see the end in sight. And for a while there, it didn't look like we were winning right away, so yeah. Well, I do have books to sell if anyone would like to have one. They cost $18 and I will certainly autograph it for you, but you're under absolutely no pressure, okay? Thank you all, you've been a wonderful audience.